Daniel Parker and Laura Simmons stood side by side at Emily's funeral, comforting each other through tears. No one knew they were the reason she was in the casket. Emily Parker's life was the kind others quietly envied. At 34, she had built a peaceful, seemingly happy existence in the small town of Ashwood, Oregon. With her soft-spoken charm and nurturing presence, she was well-loved as a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school. She lived in a modest but well-kept two-story home with her husband of 8 years, Daniel Parker, a skilled auto mechanic who ran a successful repair shop just 10 minutes from their house. Their relationship appeared solid, built on mutual respect, laughter, and shared memories. From the outside, there were no signs of conflict or secrets. They were the kind of couple neighbors smiled at when they passed by, the ones everyone trusted to host weekend BBQs or lend a hand when someone needed it. Daniel and Emily had decided not to have children, a mutual choice they both described as freeing. It allowed them to travel on occasion, take on hobbies, and invest time into their individual interests. Daniel was passionate about restoring vintage motorcycles, while Emily spent her evenings reading thrillers or baking for her coworkers. Their lifestyle was calm, predictable, and for all appearances, content. Emily's closest friend, Laura Simmons, was an ever-present figure in their lives. She and Emily had met in college, and their friendship had grown stronger with time. Laura, single and living just 20 minutes away, was more like a sister than a friend. She joined family dinners, spent the night on the couch when snowstorms made roads too dangerous, and often went on weekend trips with Emily when Daniel was busy with work. The three of them, Emily, Daniel, and Laura, were seen together so often that people joked they were a trio. There was no reason to suspect anything unusual. No whispers, no warning signs. Then came the morning of March 27th. A cold, gray sky hung over Ashwood, and Daniel made a panic call to 911 around 6:52 a.m., claiming his wife wouldn't wake up. He told the operator she had gone to bed early the night before, complaining of fatigue, and now she was completely unresponsive. First responders arrived within minutes. Emily was still in bed, under the covers, looking as though she were merely asleep. But she had no pulse. Her skin had turned pale and cool. She was pronounced dead on the scene. There were no signs of trauma. No marks, no bruises, no evidence of anything violent. Emily's room was undisturbed, her hands gently folded on her stomach, as though she'd simply drifted off in her sleep. The medical examiner's initial assessment suggested a heart issue, possibly sudden cardiac arrest. Since there was no prior history of medical conditions and no obvious cause of death, the case was closed as natural causes, and no autopsy was ordered. Her body was released for burial. Daniel appeared devastated. At the funeral, he wept openly, his voice cracking as he spoke about the woman he had loved and lost too soon. Laura stood at his side, equally grief-stricken, comforting him like a loyal friend would. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors gathered to pay their respects. The ceremony was small but heartfelt. Flowers covered Emily's casket, and her students left notes and drawings, remembering the teacher who had once brought in cupcakes for every birthday as the days passed. Sympathy cards piled up in Daniel's mailbox, and Laura continued to visit often, bringing meals, helping with paperwork, and offering support. Life in Ashwood slowly returned to normal. People mourned and moved on. But something wasn't right. Behind the quiet grief, behind the peaceful home and the clean sheets, on the bed where Emily had taken her last breath, something had gone terribly wrong. And soon, the first cracks in the story would begin to show. 1 month after Emily's quiet funeral, an unexpected letter arrived at the home of her younger sister, Megan Walters. It was addressed to Daniel, but somehow had been mailed to Megan's address, likely an error by the insurance company. Curiosity turned to confusion as she opened the envelope and read through its contents. It was a confirmation of a life insurance policy in Emily's name, updated just 3 months before her death. The coverage amount stood out immediately, $750,000, with Daniel listed as the sole beneficiary. Megan was stunned. Emily had never once mentioned the policy, and the sum seemed unusually high for someone who had no dependents and lived a modest life. Unable to shake the unease creeping into her thoughts, Megan began asking quiet questions. She contacted Emily's close colleagues at the school, hoping to learn more about her sister's life in those final weeks. To her surprise, several teachers mentioned that Emily had recently seemed more tired, occasionally distracted, but had brushed it off as stress from the school year. One colleague even recalled Emily saying, "Daniel's been acting a little strange lately," though she never elaborated. Driven by a gnawing feeling that something was off, Megan reached out to Emily's doctor, who confirmed that Emily had been in excellent health. In fact, she'd had a routine checkup 6 months earlier with no red flags. The doctor was shocked to hear her death had been ruled as natural causes with no autopsy performed. Megan's concern deepened. How could a healthy, active woman in her 30s simply die in her sleep without anyone questioning it? Determined to get answers, she contacted the county medical examiner's office to request the autopsy report. That's when she learned the truth. There wasn't one. No toxicology, no examination beyond a standard external inspection. Since Emily's death had presented no outward signs of foul play, and Daniel hadn't raised any concerns, the case had been closed without further investigation. Megan's heart sank. She couldn't explain it, but everything about the situation felt wrong. She took her suspicions to the police. At first, they were hesitant. There were no immediate signs of a crime, and without an autopsy, their hands were mostly tied. But when Megan showed them the insurance documents and revealed that Emily had changed her policy just months before her sudden death, they took notice. The timing was suspicious, more so because it seemed out of character for Emily, who had always been careful with money and wary of making big decisions without involving her sister. The police agreed to re-examine the case and secured a court order to exhume Emily's body. It was an emotionally wrenching process for Megan, but she pushed forward, needing to know the truth. Weeks later, the results of the toxicology report came in, and the findings were chilling. A rare sedative, nearly impossible to detect without advanced testing, had been found in Emily's system. The amount was lethal. It was not something that could have been ingested accidentally. Someone had drugged her. Emily's death was no longer a mystery. It was a murder. With the confirmation of foul play, the investigation shifted into high gear. Daniel was quickly brought in for questioning, though he denied any involvement. His behavior under scrutiny raised suspicions. He was cooperative but vague, often claiming not to remember details about the night of Emily's death. Laura, too, was questioned, and though she appeared genuinely upset, something about her manner unsettled the detectives. She was nervous, her answers overly rehearsed, and there were small inconsistencies in her timeline. Investigators began digging deeper into the days leading up to Emily's death and into the lives of the people closest to her. What they uncovered next would unravel everything the community thought they knew about the couple and the woman who had trusted too deeply. As detectives delved deeper into Emily Parker's sudden and suspicious death, they began examining the digital footprints left behind by the two people closest to her, her husband, Daniel, and her best friend, Laura. Investigators obtained a warrant to search Daniel's laptop, phone records, and online accounts. What they discovered began to paint a picture far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Just 3 weeks before Emily died, Daniel had conducted a series of alarming online searches. Phrases like how to make someone sleep forever, untraceable sleeping drugs, and natural causes death in sleep appeared in his browsing history. These weren't isolated or accidental clicks. They were frequent, deliberate, and consistent. Even more concerning, investigators found evidence that Daniel had purchased a rare sedative from a foreign website using a prepaid credit card and an anonymous email account. Toxicology confirmed the presence of that exact sedative. In Emily's system, it was nearly undetectable, tasteless, and could easily be mixed into a warm drink. The connection between the digital trail and the autopsy findings was undeniable. Daniel, however, continued to deny involvement, claiming he had no idea how. Emily ingested the substance. He insisted that he had searched those terms out of curiosity after reading about sudden deaths in young adults. His explanation lacked credibility and failed to match the timing or the frequency of his searches. While Daniel's story unraveled, investigators began looking into Laura Simmons. As Emily's best friend and frequent house guest, Laura had been deeply involved in Emily's personal life. Her phone records were subpoenaed, and what emerged was a web of secret communication between her and Daniel, far beyond what anyone would have expected. Dozens of texts and late-night calls had been exchanged between them in the weeks leading up to Emily's death. Many of the messages had been deleted, but forensic tools were able to recover fragments. One message from Laura read, "I can't wait for this to be behind us." Another, sent 2 days before Emily's death, simply said, "Are you sure? It'll work." Investigators were now looking at a possible conspiracy. The relationship between Daniel and Laura no longer appeared to be platonic. Surveillance of public locations, credit card receipts, and GPS data revealed that the two had met privately several times without Emily's knowledge. The visits often coincided with dates when Emily had been out of town or working late. Security. Footage from a gas station showed them laughing together in a car just 10 days before Emily died. In interviews, neighbors recalled seeing Laura's car parked in the driveway late at night, even when Emily wasn't home. Further investigation uncovered a chilling piece of evidence. A document on Daniel's computer, buried in a folder labeled Projects, was a scanned draft lease for a one-bedroom apartment in Bend, Oregon. Both Daniel and Laura's names were listed as tenants, with a move-in date scheduled just 5 weeks after Emily's death. The lease had been signed electronically. The apartment was located over 150 miles away from Ashwood, suggesting that they had planned to leave the town and start over. They hadn't expected anyone to ask questions. Detectives now had motive, means, and a digital map of the plan unfolding. Before Emily's death, the sedative, the insurance policy, the private messages, and the apartment lease all pointed to a calculated scheme, one designed to eliminate Emily without suspicion. The betrayal was overwhelming. Her husband and best friend had not only deceived her, but had plotted to end her life for money and the chance at a new beginning together. What had once looked like a tragic accident was now an unfolding nightmare. The next step for law enforcement was clear. It was time to confront Daniel and Laura with what they had uncovered, and see who would break first. With a mountain of digital evidence and toxicology results in hand, investigators knew they had enough to confront Daniel Parker and Laura Simmons. The betrayal was now no longer a theory. It was supported by cold, undeniable facts. But to make the charges stick, law enforcement needed full confessions or even more concrete proof tying both suspects directly to the murder. The pressure began with Daniel, brought in for another round of questioning. Daniel initially stuck to his original story, that he had gone to bed early with Emily, slept soundly, and found her unresponsive the next morning. But detectives had already traced his movements on the night Emily died. Security footage from a nearby store time-stamped a late-night visit where Daniel purchased a bottle of herbal tea and honey. The packaging was identical to what was found in Emily's kitchen. What made it more damning was that the tea blend was one of Emily's favorites, and according to her coworkers, she often drank it before bed. When confronted with the footage, Daniel grew visibly tense but still refused to admit involvement. Then came the turning point. Detectives presented Daniel with transcripts of the recovered text messages between him and Laura. There, in their own words, they had discussed a future together, referenced a plan, and even joked about living a stress-free life once the noise was gone. One message in particular shattered any hope of denial. It read, "You do her tea, I'll handle the rest. She'll just go to sleep." Though Laura had sent it, Daniel had replied with a thumbs-up emoji and the word perfect. Faced with this, Daniel's defenses started to crack. In a shaky voice, he admitted to putting something in Emily's tea. He claimed he hadn't meant to kill her, only to make her sleep deeply so he could talk to her later about their failing marriage without her interrupting. The explanation was absurd and inconsistent with the evidence. Investigators saw it for what it was, an attempt to minimize guilt now that the truth was unavoidable. While Daniel was detained, attention shifted to Laura. She had not been told of Daniel's partial confession and was brought in under the pretense of a routine follow-up. Laura appeared calm at first, cooperative, even tearful when discussing Emily. But as questions became more specific about her whereabouts, her messages to Daniel, and the apartment lease, her composure began to slip. She repeatedly claimed that her relationship with Daniel was purely emotional and had never crossed any lines. But investigators knew that was a lie. A neighbor had already come forward to report seeing Daniel and Laura embrace outside the Parker home late one evening while Emily was supposedly working late. When Laura was shown a printout of the recovered message she had sent about the tea, her face turned pale. She denied remembering it at first, then said it had been a joke, sent while venting frustration. But the weight of the evidence was too much. Under mounting pressure, Laura broke. She confessed that she and Daniel had been romantically involved for almost a year and that they had discussed Emily's death as a solution to their situation. Though she claimed she never believed Daniel would actually go through with it, she admitted to helping him research sedatives and even suggesting how to slip it into tea. Her hands were far from clean. The case had officially turned from suspicion to conviction. Both Daniel and Laura were charged, Daniel with first-degree murder and Laura with conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to homicide. As the news broke, the quiet town of Ashwood was stunned. People who had once admired the Parker couple now found themselves questioning every memory. The smiling photos, the weekend parties, the shared laughter, all of it had been a mask hiding something rotten. Behind every gesture of love had been a lie. Behind every hug, a secret. And behind Emily's gentle smile, a betrayal she never saw coming. The trial of Daniel Parker and Laura Simmons became one of the most shocking and talked about criminal cases in the state. When the courtroom doors opened, reporters filled the benches, and members of the Ashwood community sat in stunned silence, still struggling to process the horrifying truth. The image of Emily Parker, a kind, devoted teacher with no known enemies, had been forever altered by the chilling details of what her husband and best friend had done behind her back. The courtroom was flooded with emotions as prosecutors unveiled the timeline of deceit, manipulation, and calculated murder. Daniel sat in a navy blue suit, noticeably thinner than before, his expression hollow. Laura appeared equally worn, her face drawn and pale, as though she hadn't slept in days. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the evidence. Jurors were shown screenshots of the text messages between the two, each one peeling back the layers of their secret affair and exposing the casual manner in which they had discussed ending Emily's life. Every message, every timestamp, every search query was presented as proof of premeditation. The prosecutors described the act not as a moment of passion or rage, but as a cold, deliberate strategy carried out over months. The insurance policy was presented as the motive, a life-changing payout of $750,000, which Daniel stood to collect. Prosecutors explained how Laura and Daniel had coordinated their stories, cleaned up their digital trails, and planned to relocate and start a new life together, funded by Emily's death. Their attempts to erase messages and hide their relationship had only further solidified their guilt. As the efforts showed a consciousness of wrongdoing, Emily's sister Megan took the stand and recounted the moment she learned her sister had died, describing the wave of confusion and disbelief that followed. She spoke of Emily's vibrant personality, her dreams of writing a children's book, and how excited she had been to visit their parents in the summer. Her voice cracked as she described opening the insurance letter and realizing that the people Emily had trusted most might have been involved in her death. Her testimony left many in the courtroom in tears. The defense tried to shift blame. Daniel's attorneys argued that he had acted alone and that Laura had been manipulated, emotionally pressured by a man she trusted. Laura's team insisted that she never intended harm and believed Daniel's talk about a plan was just fantasy, not reality. But the evidence told a different story. The apartment lease, the coordinated messages, and Laura's own confession unraveled any attempt to cast doubt. After 2 weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Daniel Parker was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Laura Simmons was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to homicide, receiving a 25-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 20. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read. Megan closed her eyes, tears running down her cheeks, not out of joy, but out of exhausted relief. Justice had been served, but the wound would never fully heal.